Leora Hartman stood on the cracked stone steps of the old courthouse, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frightened animal. Each tremor she felt in her chest resonated through every muscle in her thin frame. But her face remained a smooth, mask-like calm. To the world, she appeared serene, pale skin, almost luminescent beneath the weak spring sunlight that filtered through a haze of dust and smog. But inside, her thoughts raced faster than any spirit could fly. The town of Grimsfall was as forgotten as an old ledger gathering mold in a deserted attic. Its crooked lampposts leaned like ancient sentinels, each one swaying gently with the breeze that carried the scent of decay and faded promises. No street cleaner had set foot here in years. The roadways were pockmarked with potholes deep enough to swallow a small child. On this April morning, the only movement came from rattling shutters, the occasional flutter of tattered curtains, and the low murmur of townspeople gathering behind wrought iron gates. Marred brick buildings stood silent on either side of the courthouse, their boarded-up windows like blind eyes, refusing to stare at the forgotten deeds unfolding in front of them. She could feel the presence of dozens of onlookers, villagers, curious and cold, farmers from miles around who had lost enough to debts and high interest rates themselves. They hovered close, a sea of curious faces peering over each other's shoulders. Some wore smug expressions, eager for the spectacle. Others carried furtive sympathy in their eyes, knowing what desperation did to families. Leora heard them whispering, her ears catching fragments of their words. Another one gone bad on his payments. Poor soul, ran out of luck and money. His daughter's mute. Always saw her signing to him among the ruins of their homestead. Wonder what'll become of her if he's locked away. The sting of that last comment pierced her like a blade. She pressed her fingers to her lips instinctively, fingers brushing her lips as though to reassure herself of her own silence. She had learned early that any momentary lapse could bring pity or disdain. Breath steadying, she reminded herself that she was strong, stronger than the cruel judgments of the masses. Inside the courthouse, the hallways were lined with peeling paint and grimy marble floors that echoed each step with a hollow ring. The stench of damp plaster and mildew lingered in the air. Leora forced her shoulders back and held her head high as she followed her father into the courtroom, matching her pace to his deliberate shuffles. Gabriel Hartman, her father, moved slowly, his once broad shoulders now stooped beneath the weight of a year's worth of worry and toil. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, threads frayed at the edges, and his leather shoes were caked with dirt from trudging through muddy fields in search of work. All morning, Gabriel had attempted to find any form of gainful employment. Hauling crates, fixing broken fences, hauling water for townsfolk. None paid enough to stave off the debt that had accrued since his wife's death 2 winters ago. Since then, he had borrowed from every lender within 100 miles, pledging what little he owned, a single-acre patch of land that barely yielded enough crops to feed them both. Still, it had never been enough. The courtroom doors opened with a weary groan, and Leora followed him into the chamber. Rough-hewn wooden benches lined the sides, and in the center sat a raised dais where Judge Mahoney presided. He looked every bit the part, a stern face with silver hair combed so precisely it gleamed beneath the chandelier's dim light. His robes were worn but clean, each fold a testament to a life spent dispensing laws and judgments. Leora's heart went cold when she saw the ledgers stacked before him, black-bound books overflowing with ink-stained pages detailing Gabriel's debts. She settled into a rear bench, far enough from the judge's gaze to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to see her father's face reflected in the polished wood of the defense stand. "Gabriel Hartman," Judge Mahoney began in a voice like gravel, "you have been brought before this court for failure to pay your outstanding debts to multiple creditors. The records indicate that over the past 12 months you have borrowed sums exceeding $2,000, with interest rates computed at 20% per annum. You have made no payments in the past 6 months. How do you plead?" Leora swallowed hard, her throat constricting. She watched as Gabriel opened his mouth to speak but could not find the words. He hovered, eyes shut, as though willing the words to appear. His face was drawn, shadows etched beneath his eyes. At 28, he looked older than his years. "Guilty." "Your Honor," Gabriel said at last, his voice low and ragged, as though he had strained it carrying water buckets to keep Leora alive. "Very well," Judge Mahoney said, his tone unyielding. "The law is clear. Failure to satisfy debts results in forfeiture of all assets. You will have 7 days to pay in full, or this court will seize your land and belongings to satisfy the owed amount. If you cannot pay, the court must consider whether you are to be sent to the county workhouse until your debt is repaid through assigned labor. Do you understand?" Gabriel's breathing grew rapid. Leora could see the panic flood his eyes. He nodded faintly. "Yes, Your Honor." At that moment, Leora felt anger surge through her, a hot, molten river of rage threatening to overflow its banks. This man, her father, was more than just a debtor. He was a man who had surrendered his own desires, who had labored tirelessly, in the freezing winds of 2 winters, to protect and provide for her. He had raised her alone since her mother's death, teaching her to read lips and to write in a tattered journal when no one would speak to her because she could not speak. She, whose voice was stolen by a fever at age 5, Leora understood each whispered rumor in this courtroom, each sideways glance from the creditors who believed him worthless. But she also believed something else, that a father's love was beyond any ledger's entry, that there was worth in a human soul no law could measure. Her eyes blazed with determination. As Judge Mahoney left a pregnant pause, the gallery held its breath. Some leaned forward, curious what emotional plea, if any, Gabriel might deliver. Tears glossed his eyes as he fumbled, searching his mind for anything to save them. Leora saw his hand tremble as he reached for something in his coat pocket. She could not be sure what, but perhaps a scrap of paper detailing some promise of payment or a note begging for mercy. Leora's pulse hammered again. She knew what she could do, what she must do. Gathering every ounce of courage in her slight frame, she stood. The hush in the courtroom grew almost unbearable. The judge's brow furrowed at the sudden movement. Gabriel's head snapped to face her. Leora took slow, steady steps toward the center of the courtroom, every pair of eyes burning into her back. She passed stained wooden benches, murmurs rippling across the crowd. "Your Honor!" she signed frantically, then tapped her throat to remind herself to speak with her hands, not voice. She closed her eyes momentarily to steel herself, then opened them wide. She raised her hands and began her practiced signing, each movement precise, her fingers cutting through the stale air of the courtroom. "He is my father." Silence descended, like a suffocating blanket. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The bailiff dropped his gaze, uncertain whether to intervene. All eyes acclimated to her, some in astonishment that she dared address the court, others in contempt, thinking of the audacity of a mute girl standing before the judge. Judge Mahoney shifted in his seat, leaning forward. "What is the meaning of this, miss? You cannot simply interrupt proceedings." Another moment of stillness. Leora's chest heaved. Her fingers flew as she completed her phrase. "He is my father. I will assume responsibility for his debt. Let me work until it is paid." A murmur rose from the gallery, rippling like wind across a forbidden plain. Gasps and astonished whisperings. Gabriel stared up at her, tears brimming. The hush settled again as the judge studied her, eyes narrowing. "Judge." Mahoney drummed his fingertips on the desk, the sound loud in the sudden silence. "Miss, what's your name?" Leora hesitated, her throat tightening. She silenced the impulse to sign again, knowing he needed to hear her speak. With trembling lips, she found her voice for the first time in nearly 14 years. "Leora Hartman," she said. The words emerged soft but clear, tremors layered in her tone. "I am 18 years old, and I will pay his debts in full." She pulled out a folded parchment and laid it on the judge's desk. The judge frowned, his gaze flicking between Leora's face and the parchment. Closing her eyes briefly, she could feel his cold gaze burning into her flesh. Then she opened her eyes and met his stare without flinching. "This letter," he said, his voice clipped, "is from the City Council of Edgewood. It states that Leora Hartman will serve as a clerk in the council's archives for the next 5 years, at a salary of $15 per month, with all her earnings to be allocated to Mr. Hartman's debts until they are paid in full. At that point, she will assume full ownership of her father's land and home. Is that correct?" Leora nodded, her lips pressing together as she held back a sob. She was prepared to sacrifice her youth to save her father. In Grimsfall, no one dared employ a mute woman. But across the river, in the larger township of Edgewood, a small group was willing to teach her the ancient art of record-keeping, knowledge her mother once had. If she could master it, she could earn enough to clear her father's debts. The journey home was silent. Gabriel placed one hand on her shoulder as they walked down the narrow lane that led to their dilapidated cottage. The roof sagged precariously, sagging like a tired animal, and the windows were covered in grime so thick that no light could penetrate. Inside, a single room housed them both. A crudely patched mattress lay in one corner. A bead-curtained entrance led to the tiny kitchen, where a hearth sat cold and unused. A broken clock on the wall ticked off the seconds in a hopeless rhythm. Leora knelt by a wooden chest and opened it, revealing stacks of yellowed letters, worn journals, and the few belongings they had managed to hold onto through the years. She pulled out a faded drawing of her mother, her voice handwritten along the margins in elegant script. "For my dearest Leora, may you always find your voice in the ink and quill." Her fingers trembled as she traced the words. She closed her eyes, imagining her mother's gentle smile and the warmth of her voice, but the silence remained, deeper than any night sky. She had accepted it long ago. Gabriel entered, setting down a small bowl of broth on a cracked table. He offered it to Leora, whose hunger warred with her grief. She took the bowl with both hands and lifted it to her lips, the bitter liquid scorching her throat and leaving a trail of heat along her spine. "Tonight," he said, gently shaking her shoulder. "I know you're thinking of Edgewood. I want you to rest." Leora nodded, though her mind raced with equations. How many hours of labor would she need to pay off $2,000 at $15 a month? Almost 14 years. No, longer with the cost of living. But the council had promised more work over time, perhaps a raise. If she excelled, she could learn to translate documents, acquire rare skills, and earn stipends on the side. Still, it frightened her. "I won't let you down," she signed as the only way to communicate with the world immediately. "I will make this work." She caught her father's eye, saw the flicker of hope there, and felt her resolve crystallize in her core. That night, she lay on the mattress beside her father, staring at the ceiling where webs of cracks formed constellations. In the dim light of a dying candle, sleep was elusive. Her mind danced between memories of better days and the bleak uncertainty of tomorrow. She thought of the rhythm of quill on parchment, the hush of the archives, and the promise of a future, where letters might give her a voice of their own. The wind howled outside, rattling the eaves like a mournful dirge. Leora squeezed her eyes shut and whispered a silent prayer. "Give me strength. Help me find my way." Dawn came too soon. She rose before the sun, moving like a shadow as she packed her belongings. She folded her mother's journal, her own battered, notebooks where she had practiced writing uninterrupted, and a few simple clothes. In her pocket, she tucked the letter from the Edgewood Council, the only lifeline to a chance at redemption. Gabriel awakened as she slipped out the door. He stood on the threshold in a rumpled shirt, his eyes swollen from tears he had refused to shed in front of her. "How long?" he began, but she held up a finger, signaling him to wait as she retrieved a small piece of chalk. With swift strokes, she drew her hand, signing across her throat, and then traced a path from her chest outward. "I will speak through my pen." Her father's eyes glistened with pride. Leora climbed into the rickety cart waiting at the edge of the lane. The driver, a grizzled man named Rowan Tucker, opened his mouth to speak but closed it when he saw her. He had seen her signing before and understood her better than most. He motioned for her to climb up onto the wooden bench beside him. The wagon rattled away from Grimsfall, leaving behind a swirl of dust that clung to her sleeves. Leora turned for one last look at the only home she had ever known. In its broken windows, she saw her father standing by the door, a solitary figure framed by ruins. The memory would remain with her, a beacon in the darkest nights ahead. The road to Edgewood was a narrow dirt path that wound through barren fields and battered stone fences. On either side, skeletal trees reached toward the sky, their branches like arthritic fingers pointing in silent judgment. Leora inhaled the acrid scent of mud and manure mixed with the green tang of budding grass. Her journal rested on her lap. She flipped it open and traced lines in careful script, preparing for long hours of study. As the sun climbed higher, the scenery shifted. Brown fields gave way to lush meadows, and the air grew thicker with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Leora felt a tremor of anticipation. Edgewood was rumored to be a bastion of knowledge, a place where ancient tomes lined shelves and scholars debated the laws of nature in candlelit halls. Perhaps here she would find the means to rise above her circumstances. But for now, she focused. On the journey ahead, her thoughts anchored to the promise she had made to save her father. She let her mind drift to the ledger she would soon copy, the Latin phrases she would learn to translate. Each mile brought her closer to new trials, new faces, and the possibility of hope. The cart came to a halt at the city gates of Edgewood. A tall iron portcullis rose with a groan, revealing a bustling town beyond. Stone streets pulsed with life, merchants hawking wares in the market square, children racing past with wooden swords, and scholars hurrying toward the grand courthouse-like building at the city's heart. Leora's pulse quickened. These streets were different, alive in ways Grimsfall had never been. She could hear the melody of a lute drifting from an open window, the shouts of traders bartering over fabrics dyed, in colors she had never imagined. The air smelled of fresh bread, spilled ink, and leather-bound books. Rowan helped her down from the cart. She steadied herself on the cobblestones, drinking in the sights and sounds. In her mind, she catalogued everything, the ornate carvings. Over each shop, the banners fluttering from the city walls, the majestic spire of the Cathedral of St. Eloan piercing the sky. But beneath the beauty, she sensed an undercurrent of indifference. People bustled past without a second glance. To them, she was just another traveler, a nameless, helpless girl in tattered clothes. She felt a pang of loneliness. No one here knew her story or what she had sacrificed. "This is where I leave. You, Leora?" Rowan said gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. "The council's archives are 3 blocks north and 1 to the east. A woman named Ms. Dunham will meet you there. Be brave." Leora nodded, swallowing against the swell of fear in her chest. She stepped forward, clutching her journal like a shield. The crowd parted as she walked, some offering curious looks, others dismissive glances. She paused at the intersection, looking for a building that matched the sketch Rowan had drawn earlier. Tall windows framed with ivy, a heavy oak door, and a brass plaque etched with the words Edgewood Council Archives. Sure enough, it stood 2 blocks ahead, proud and resolute. Leora approached slowly. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would betray her presence. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and knocked firmly on the door. The sound echoed in the narrow alleyway. Someone inside shuffled toward the door. After a moment it opened. A woman stood there, tall, austere, in a dark gown that swept the doorstep like a shadow. Her hair was silver and pulled back into a tight bun. Sharp, curious eyes studied Leora as though she were an unfinished manuscript. "You must be Leora Hartman," the woman said, her voice crisp and clear. "I am Eleanor Dunham. Come in." Leora stepped inside, leaving behind the cold brightness of the courtyard for the dim warmth of the archives. The door closed behind her with a solid thud that resonated in her chest. She stood in a narrow foyer lit by a single candle. A faint scent of dust and parchment wove around her, comforting and intimidating all at once. Ms. Dunham motioned for Leora to follow. They passed beneath an archway into a vast chamber lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves brimming with scrolls and leather-bound volumes. Long wooden tables stood in neat rows, illuminated by clusters of brass lanterns. A high stained-glass window filtered light in fractured hues, casting prismatic patterns on the hardwood floor. Leora felt awe wash over her. She had never seen so many books in one place. She imagined the countless stories contained within these pages, legends of kings and battles, records of countless lives etched in ink. "You will begin your training tomorrow," Ms. Dunham said as she guided Leora to a small desk in a corner. "First, you will learn to categorize the entries by date and subject. Then, you will practice transcribing from Latin to the common tongue. The work is difficult, but I believe you have the skill and determination to succeed." She handed Leora a quill and a sheet of parchment. "Write a sample for me. Copy this entry in neat script." Leora took a deep breath and dipped the quill in ink. Her fingers trembled as she began to write, carefully shaping each letter. Time slipped away as her pen glided across the parchment. Outside, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and a distant bell tolled. But Leora paid no mind to anything but the ink and the parchment, forging each letter like a lightning bolt slicing the darkness. As dusk settled in through the stained-glass window, Ms. Dunham finally called, "Enough. Your penmanship is excellent, though your speed will need improvement. You have much to learn, Miss Hartman." She closed her ledger and met Leora's gaze. "You begin at first light tomorrow. For now, rest." "This will be your room," Ms. Dunham said. "You may keep your journals in the trunk. Save room for the volumes you will study." Leora took in the room. It was Spartan, but clean. She recognized the scent of cedar in the wooden floorboards. She knelt and placed her journal on the desk, then walked to the window. Below, the townspeople milled about, and merchants called out their wares in booming voices. Leora thought of the path that had led her here, the cold walls of Grimsfalls, Courthouse, her trembling father's plea, the shattered homestead. She wondered if she had the fortitude to shoulder this burden. The faint glow from the lamp lit her journal's pages like a promise of hope. A knock at the door startled her. Ms. Dunham peeked inside, eyes softening. "Dinner will be served in the dining hall at 7. I will send someone to remind you. Try to rest tonight, Miss Hartman. Tomorrow marks the beginning of your journey." Alone now, Leora sat on the edge of the cot and fingered her mother's drawing. Thoughts coursed through her mind: fear, determination, guilt. She realized that though she had spoken her first words in years, she had not yet found her true voice. The quill would be her sword, parchment her shield. But in the quiet darkness, Leora wondered if it would be enough. Above her, the moon drifted through the stained glass window in glowing shards, illuminating the dust motes that danced. Like fireflies, she stared at her reflection in the glass, a lone girl on the threshold of a new life. In that moment, a sound echoed from the hallway, a low thud, like a boot hitting the floor, followed by hushed footsteps, retreating. Leora's breath caught in her throat. She rose and approached the door, heart pounding. She cracked it open just enough to peer out. The corridor was empty, lit only by a flickering lamp at the far end. No one should be walking these halls at midnight. The archives were closed, the staff gone. Yet the sound of distant shuffling persisted. Leora's pulse quickened. She slipped back inside and locked the door, her knuckles white. She returned to the window and peered out. Under the glow of a street lamp across the road, she saw a silhouette, a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, watching the building. The figure stood motionless, as though waiting, her breath caught in her lungs. Who could it be? A creditor tracking her down? A townsman from Grimsfall come to gloat, or someone else, someone tied to the secrets of this place? Leora's heart hammered, and her hands trembled. The figure lifted a hand and beckoned, slow and deliberate. Leora stumbled back, panic flaring in her chest. The moonlight shone upon the face beneath the hood, revealing sharp features and steely eyes that drilled into her soul. The figure's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Leora's mind raced. Should she confront the stranger, call for help? She felt suddenly trapped between desire and terror. Slowly, she backed away from the window, footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging the room into darkness. Leora's breath hitched as she fumbled for a match. She struck it, and the small flame flickered to life. In its glow, she saw the shadows dance along the walls. A hush swept through the chamber, as though the world itself held its breath. Leora knew she could not stay here. Tomorrow, she would begin her work, but tonight, something had come calling. She gripped her mother's journal, her only comfort, in this unfamiliar place, and crept toward the small wardrobe against the far wall. The locked door clicked open, and Leora slipped inside just as she heard a soft knock on her chamber door from the outside. A voice, smooth as silk, whispered her name. "Leora Hartman, I know you're in there. Don't be afraid. I only wish to offer my help." Her blood froze. She pressed herself against the wall of the wardrobe, breathing in short gasps. She had never been so alone, so vulnerable, so close to discovering something that might shatter her already fragile world. The knocking continued, low and rhythmic, echoing in her chest. The stranger's voice seeped through the door. "I know what you did in that courtroom. I know who you are, and I can help you if you let me." Leora's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the voice could hear it. She sank to her knees, clutching the journal to her chest as though it could protect her. The match's flame guttered and died, leaving her in pitch-black darkness. She closed her eyes and braced herself for the unknown, and in that moment she understood that her journey had only just begun. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Leora Hartman crouched in the cramped darkness of the wardrobe, heart pounding like a hammer on an anvil. Her fingers clutched the worn leather cover of her mother's journal, thumb brushing familiar ridges of faded gold embossing. The knocking on her door persisted, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed through the silent corridor like a death knell. Leora's breath hitched as each tap sent reverberations through her chest. She forced herself to remain still, to slip into the stillness of night and hope that the silence would swallow her. Outside, the voice drifted low and hushed. "Leora, I know you're in there. Don't be afraid. I only wish to offer my help." The tone carried a strange mixture of warmth and calculation, like the sun's warmth filtered through frosted glass, inviting yet distant. The stranger's voice clashed with the impenetrable quiet of the archives. It felt out of place in this sanctum of knowledge. Leora shook her head, trying to block it out. Her wide eyes searched the narrow confines of the wardrobe for something, anything she could use. Above her, the wooden shelf groaned under the weight of old blankets. Beside her, a simple wooden beam provided a momentary sense of security. If only she could slip through the thin sliver of space between the door and frame. But her mind knew the library door was likely bolted from the outside. Panic clawed at her throat like a feral cat. A hushed whisper broke through the tension. "You can't hide forever, Miss Hartman. This place is old, full of secrets and shadows, but I can guide you, I can keep you safe." The words struck Leora like a blow. Safe. How could anyone be safe in a place where her life's purpose, to rescue her father from ruin, felt so fragile, so easily broken? The bookshelf beside Leora trembled slightly as footsteps paced back and forth. Each footstep seemed impossibly heavy, as though the stranger's boots were made of lead. Leora stifled a moan as she thought of her father's frail form far away, in Grimsfall, awaiting her letters of progress. She could not let anything derail her mission, but curiosity warred with fear. Who could this stranger be? A creditor from Grimsfall? A member of Edgewood's council with clandestine motives? A thief seeking to exploit her vulnerabilities? She thought of her mother's words, scrawled in elegant cursive within the torn pages of her journal. Even in darkness, truth can be found if you listen. Gathering her courage bit by bit, Leora took a shallow breath, then another. Letting. The world narrowed to the faint glow of moonlight that filtered through the gaps in the wardrobe's wooden slats. She pressed her lips together and, barely audibly, whispered a single word. "Speak." Silence greeted her, then a rustle, as though the door's panel shifted under a gentle hand. The stranger's voice, now quieter. "Do not reveal yourself." "Not yet. My name is Casimir Forbes. I am the custodian of this archive. I know who you are, and I know what you've sacrificed." The name hovered in the corridor, its syllables dripping with something heavy. History, guilt, maybe a hint of admiration. Leora's eyes widened. Casimir Forbes. The custodian, an official position granted to only a few. Rumor said he oversaw the entire collection of the ancient archives, guarding secrets older than most of Edgewood's citizens could fathom. She remembered Miss Dunham mentioning him in passing. A reclusive man of rigid principles, fiercely loyal to the council, but skeptical of newcomers. "Why are you here?" She signed within the confines of her silent mind, sending the question into the darkness. Another hesitant pause, followed by Casimir's voice. "Because I've watched you since you arrived. You work harder than anyone I've ever known, but this place, it's not as safe as it appears. You've made enemies, Leora Hartman, enemies who would see you and your father suffer. I came to warn you." Her mind raced. Enemies. Who could bring harm to a mute clerk? She'd had grievances with creditors, with townsfolk who saw her and Gabriel's plight as an opportunity to gloat. But to kill or harm, was that within anyone's capacity? She weighed each thought carefully. Truth and lie often wore identical faces. Why, help me. She asked the darkness, her sign language morphing into questions that echoed in her broad mind but not in sound. "I have reasons," came the reply. "But you must trust me. Come to the East Wing, room 17. Do not bring anyone. Do not alert. Miss Dunham, tonight the council enacts a purge of documents related to the old slaving trades, files that reveal hidden alliances." He hesitated. "There are truths written in those parchments that could free your father or damn him forever. Free or damn." Leora's pulse quickened. The promise of a path to salvage her father's future sent warmth through her chest. Yet the warning of damnation chilled her to the bone. She allowed the final threads of doubt to unravel as determination wove itself around her heart. She would follow this clue. She had to. Casimir continued, "But you must be swift." They begin around midnight. The east wing is unguarded then once the scholars depart. I will leave a lantern at the base of the stone staircase leading there. Trust no one but me. Remember, room 17, east wing. The footsteps retreated, and Casimir's final words whispered through the door. "I'll see you soon, Leora." The hallway receded into silence again. No tap of boots, no telltale creak of wood, nothing but the low hum of the ancient building. Leora exhaled, her breath trembling. She waited until the hush became absolute before easing herself from the wardrobe. Her legs were stiff from crouching, but she moved with careful grace, sliding the door open just enough to peer into the moonlit corridor. No one stood there. Soft lamps cast a golden glow on the polished floor, but her battered shoes made hardly a sound. She closed the wardrobe behind her, her shoulders pressed close to the wall, eyes darting for any sign of movement. The archives were normally locked. For the night, desolate, except for the patrolling caretaker and the guard stationed near the main entrance. In her current room, the only place to exit was the narrow staircase at the far end of the corridor. If Casimir had bid her to proceed, she would need to trust that no other obstacles lay in her path. Following the corridor's length, she navigated past closed doors, labeled with names she didn't yet recognize, repository room, translation office, regulatory files, each door a promise of secrets and knowledge that she had only begun to unravel. The east wing lay 2 flights down, accessed by a spiraling staircase worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Leora's fingertips traced the cold, carved stone banister as she descended, the wooden slats groaning under her weight. Reaching the east wing, she emerged into a long, echoing hall lined with towering shelves. Here, the air felt colder, thick with the musty scent of parchment and leather bindings. Tiny motes of dust drifted through the amber glow of chandeliers, catching the light like suspended stars. Tables stood at intervals, each with a brass lantern, some dark, some kindling faint embers of oil. Leora's pulse quickened as she spotted the lantern Casimir had mentioned. It lay cradled in an alcove on the floor, its flame flickering in a gentle, beckoning dance. She approached, keeping to the shadows. The lantern's flicker cast an amber glow on the adjacent wall. A slate plaque etched with the words, "East. Wing Archives, restricted access." She swallowed hard, pressing a hand to the cool wood of a nearby shelf. The contents here were ancient, wax-sealed scrolls, vellum tomes bound with cracked leather, and ledgers inscribed in Latin and Old Edgewood dialects. Each volume seemed to hum with history, the weight of countless stories buried in time. Leora's fingers itched to trace the spines, but she pushed herself for a singular purpose, room 17. She moved swiftly along the corridor, passing numbered doors. 1, 2, 3. But instead of numbers, each door bore a symbol, a quill, a seal, a winged hourglass. Leora glanced at a small chart pinned to a nearby bulletin board. It listed each room's number and purpose. Room 17, marked with a stylized quill crossed over an open book, referred to illegal trade records. Her breath caught. Illegal trade records. The very phrase hinted at shadowed dealings and secrets meant to be buried. She squeezed her journal to her chest and moved toward the door. Her steps were light, but the boards creaked ever so slightly beneath her weight. She froze, listening. No sound but the soft whisper of the night breeze drifting through the arched window at the hall's end. She exhaled and reached for the tarnished brass handle. It turned with a slight groan, revealing a dimly lit room. Stacks of crates, piles of dusty volumes, crates marked with sealed wax, and ink-stained manuscripts tied with twine. The air felt thick and heavy, as though every breath she took carried the weight of betrayed lives. Leora stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. The lantern's light danced across the room, illuminating a rifle leaning against a crate. Her heart jolted. Weapons here. She stared at the gun, its barrel long and gleaming dully in the lantern's glow. It seemed out of place amidst the scrolls and parchment. What did Casimir intend? Was this a trap? She shook her head, dismissing the doubt. Casimir's words echoed in her mind. Hidden alliances, truths that could free your father or damn him. Perhaps the weapon was for protection, an acknowledgement that this darkness might not remain hidden without blood being shed. "Rest for now," Father Umbridge said, helping her to a wooden pew. "I will summon those who can act swiftly. Tomorrow at first light we'll move." Leora closed her eyes, letting sleep take her, knowing that the dawn would bring the greatest trial of all. Leora awoke to the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. The world outside was waking. Birds sang on the eaves, and the faint rumble of carts stirred the town to life. She rubbed her aching eyes and blinked, recalling the rush of the previous night, the escape through the tunnel, the discovery of the ledger, Father Umbridge's solemn vow. Her limbs ached, but her resolve remained unbroken. Father Umbridge stood at her side, holding a steaming cup of tea. He extended it to her, and she sipped gratefully, letting the warmth fill her chest. "News?" Leora whispered. "I have gathered a small group, some sympathetic council members, a few conscientious guards, and a scribe who can present this ledger properly," Father Umbridge replied. "We will approach the council chamber in an hour. By the time the town hears of it, you and your father must be long gone to protect you both." Leora nodded, finishing the tea. She stood, her legs shaky. Father Umbridge handed her a cloak to cover her simple dress. "Go to the house where your father waits. He believes you have been lost forever. He must not see this. It will frighten him. I'll send word to him once it is safe." Leora slipped out of the chapel, moving along narrow lanes lined with shuttered homes and wattle fences. The air smelled of fresh-baked bread from a nearby bakery, though the aroma did little to soothe her. She clutched the cloak around her, careful not to reveal her identity. Reaching the outskirts, she retraced her steps toward her father's cottage. The thatched roof rose above a low fence, and she crept toward the side entrance. The cottage was silent, blanketed in the soft glow of dawn. She paused, heart clenched with fear. She had promised to protect him, yet she would risk everything to free him. Inside, she found Gabriel Hartman kneeling before a wooden altar where he'd set a single candle. His head bowed, he murmured a prayer. The lines of exhaustion on his face had deepened. Dark circles under his eyes bore witness to. Nights spent in worry and hope, Leora's heart swelled. She approached him, and he looked up, astonishment flooding his features. "Leora!" he whispered, as though he could not believe his eyes. She knelt beside him, pulling him into a trembling embrace. "Father," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "It's me." He searched her face, confusion and joy mingling. "But I thought you were trapped in Edgewood. The court's guard said you never arrived." Leora swallowed, steadying herself. "I found the records. They prove the council has been complicit in crimes against our people. Your land was taken through a rigged transaction. But now they will restore it." His eyes widened, and he embraced her fiercely. "You've done the impossible, my child." He pulled back, tears streaming. "But if they discover the ledger in your satchel, they will kill anyone in its path." Leora nodded. "So I must leave. Father Umbridge will soon notify you when it's safe. Until then, hide here. They will be blind to this place until it is too late." She rose to leave, but Gabriel grasped her arm. "Take this," he said, pressing a small pouch into her hand. "Money for the road. just in case. She felt tears sting her eyes as she hugged him once more. "I will return to you. I swear." He nodded, unable to speak. She stepped into the morning light, her heart heavy with both hope and fear. Leora moved silently down the path, hugging the south wall of the cottage until she reached the chapel, where Father Umbridge stood waiting alongside a small contingent. Father Umbridge's eyes met hers with pride and sorrow. She handed him a slip of parchment, a note to her father with instructions to remain hidden. "Go now," Umbridge whispered. "I will handle the council. May the truth set you and your father free." Leora slipped away, her footsteps light on the cobblestones. She headed north toward the river's edge. The sun climbed higher, gilding the rooftops in golden light. Edgewood's spires loomed in the distance, its walls a glittering promise of justice or revenge. Back at the council chambers, Father Umbridge's small group gathered in a hidden corridor. They wore plain garments, blending with the morning. As the council assembled for its daily session, the group slipped into the chamber through a side door ordinarily reserved for clerks. Rumors of a recent fire in the West Wing circulated, providing a convenient distraction for those who might otherwise notice their covert entry. The council's grand chamber bustled with activity. Noble families claimed the bench seats, their robes of deep blue and crimson signifying their lineage. Murmurs swirled as the president of the council, Lord Elandrin, took his place at the dais. His silver hair gleamed beneath the chandelier's glow, and his stern gaze swept across the room. Father Umbridge emerged quietly, followed by the sympathetic council members, Councilwoman Rosine Mallory and Councilman Jareth Fallowfield, both known for their integrity. A guard stood at the chamber's entrance, but the gathered members ignored him, focusing instead on the papers before them. Rosine Mallory whispered to Jareth, "We can't keep this hidden for much longer. The people of Grimsfall have suffered enough." Jareth nodded grimly. "It's time to expose the corruption. We risk exile for this, but we must." Umbridge approached the dais, drawing the chamber's attention. "Honored council members," he began, voice calm but firm, "I stand before you on a matter of grave importance. My words carry evidence that threatens the very foundation of this council and the welfare of our people." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Lord Elandrin's brows furrowed. "Speak, Father Umbridge. Reveal your proof." With that, Rosine stepped forward, placing the sealed satchel on the dais. She looked to Umbridge, then pressed her hand against the satchel until it opened, revealing the aged ledger. This ledger, Umbridge's voice trembled, is an official record of human trade and usury. Among its pages are the names of prominent council members, including Mortimer Ashwood, who acquired the Hartman homestead through deceptive means. We have proof that this information was suppressed at the cost of innocent families, including that of a young woman named Leora Hartman. Leora watched from the gallery, hidden behind a tall column. Her chest tightened as she recognized faces in the ledger, faces revered here. Some council members stiffened, others glanced away guiltily. "This evidence shall be presented to the public after the session," Umbridge declared. "Those found guilty must face trial." Lord Elandrin rose, his voice booming. "This is treasonous. You accuse us of crimes without corroboration." Jareth spoke up, stepping toward the desk. "I have verified each entry. We have testimonies from Grimsfall's townspeople, affidavits from escaped laborers, and records from the original Slavia transactions. We present these documents to you, my lord, for your judgment." A tense hush fell. Lord Elandrin's face darkened as murmurs spread like wildfire. The gravity of betrayal hung thick in the air. Umbridge turned to Leora domestically, then nodded to a guard. The guard approached, ushering Leora from the gallery to the chamber floor. The council members parted as she walked, her heart pounding. She stood before them, small and trembling, but unwavering. Lord Elandrin regarded her coldly. "You are Leora Hartman, young clerk. You accuse us of complicity in human trafficking. Is this true?" Leora's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. She opened her mouth to speak, then remembered the quiver of sound years ago, each word scarce and precious. She placed a trembling hand on her heart and began, her voice soft but clear. "My father was one of the many who fell prey to the council's hidden dealings. His land and livelihood were taken as part of a collusion with the Slavia family. I came to Edgewood to earn my keep and provide for my family. Instead, I discovered this ledger, proof that you have profited from selling human lives and destroying families. You stand in judgment of my father, but you have condemned countless others." A murmur of outrage erupted. Some council members rose shouting accusations. Others looked down at their hands in shame. Leora held her ground, though each breath felt like shards of glass in her lungs. Lord Elandrin pounded his gavel. "Enough!" The chamber fell into ominous silence. He looked first at Mortimer Ashwood, whose face had gone pale. "Ashwood, these accusations come from the ledger you sealed with your own hand. How do you plead?" Ashwood's voice cracked as he responded. "I admit to the transactions, but they were legal at the time." Father Umbridge stepped forward, his arms folded, legal perhaps, under a law that allowed greed to overshadow morality, but justice is not bound by the whim of those in power. These records show that your actions violated the fundamental rights of human beings. They stand in defiance of all we claim to hold sacred. A chorus of voices rose in outrage. "Disgrace! Treason! She is but a child." Leora felt her resolve flicker. She looked to Jareth, who nodded subtly, urging her onward. Taking a steadying breath, she said, "I am a child no more. I have learned what it means to carry the weight of truth, and if it costs me everything, I will stand by it." A hush fell. Once more, even Lord Elandrin seemed unmoved by the collective uprising. Finally he spoke, voice stern. "The council will deliberate on these charges. Meanwhile, you have placed us all in danger, young Hartman. What say you in your defense?" Leora's voice trembled but rang true. "If justice is what you fear, then I will plead for mercy on behalf of those who cannot speak. I will not be silenced." She felt Griffith glance at her from across the chamber, eyes filled with a complex mixture of pride and sorrow. He approached the dais, and with formal resolve, she offered the ledger for council inspection. The council took the tome and examined its pages. For each page turned, hushed gasps and exclamations rippled through the chamber. The ledger's weight, literal and figurative, pressed upon every council member. At last, Lord Elandrin lowered the ledger. "The evidence is overwhelming. Each transaction listed here is condemned by law and conscience. Ashwood, Fallowfield, and the others named here will be tried immediately. Until then, this chamber is adjourned." A murmur of shock filled the room. Some council members whispered apologies, others pleaded for clemency. Leora watched as a guard approached and, surprisingly, cupped her shoulder gently. "You should return to Grimsfall," he said quietly. "They will be searching for you. Father Umbridge has arranged safe passage. Go quickly." She nodded, her heart battered by relief and fear, and followed the guard to a side exit. Outside, the morning air felt different, fresh, as though the city itself had exhaled a century's worth of dust and secrets. Leora allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply. She thought of her father waiting across the river, feeling more weight lift from her shoulders with each step. She hurried toward the riverbank, where an old skiff drifted near a sheltered inlet. The guard placed one end of a small boat ramp against the edge. Leora stepped inside and dipped the oars into the gentle current. She'd learned to row as a child, her father's lessons echoing in her muscles. The wood beneath her calloused fingers was familiar, warm with early sunlight. Pushing off, she guided the boat toward the opposite bank. Each stroke through the water carried the promise of redemption. She felt the weight of the ledger's memory. In her mind, though the tome itself was now in the council's custody, destined to serve justice rather than corruption. By the time she reached Grimsfall's shore, the sun had emerged fully from the horizon, igniting the sky in hues of peach and gold. She paused at the riverbank, looking across the mist-shrouded fields that led to her family's homestead. She could just make out her father's figure waiting by the fence, a silhouette edged by dawn's glow. Leora leapt from the boat, gripping the ledger sack's strap at her side. She rushed across the sodden grass toward him. Gabriel Hartman turned at the sound of her footsteps. His eyes widened in disbelief, then softened in joy as he pulled her into a tight embrace. She felt the tears well in her eyes as she pressed her cheek against his shoulder. "You did it," he murmured, voice trembling. "You saved us." She nodded, pressing her forehead to his. "It's over. Your land is yours again. I've given them all the proof." He exhaled, a shuddering sigh of relief. "Your mother would be proud." Leora closed her eyes, letting the warmth of her father's arms cradle her. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of fresh earth and promise. In that moment, she understood how fragile truth could be, and how powerful it was to wield it with courage. She stood and stepped back, looking at the cottage, the farmland beyond, the horizon stretching infinitely ahead. The world seemed to hold its breath, as though awaiting her next move. Leora took a firm breath and spoke, voice crisp in the morning air. "I'm going to build something new here, something stronger. For you, for me, for all of them." Gabriel nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I believe in you, my daughter." As they stood together, the dawn broke fully, illuminating the fields in golden light. Leora felt hope surge through her veins. Here, in the place where legends faded like scars, she had rekindled a new story. A story of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. Leora Hartman awoke to the gentle lull of her father's voice, the early morning sunlight warm on her face. She blinked against the brightness and rose from the straw-covered blanket spread beneath the ancient oak. Gabriel Hartman stood across the field, leaning against the fence, his silhouette framed by dawn's glow. He watched her with an expression of cautious hope, as though afraid to let faith soften into indulgence. Leora slipped from the cottage and walked barefoot across the dew-kissed grass. The chill of the morning air bit at her skin, reminding her that this world was still raw and unpolished. She met her father by the fence, where he extended a calloused hand. "You rest," he said. "We've a long day ahead." She nodded, her muscles aching but her spirit buoyant. The farm awaited her attention, a modest stretch of land that had long lain fallow, its soil depleted by years of neglect. Today, however, the fields gleamed with new potential. Leora's father handed her a small wooden basket filled with seeds, wheat, barley, and a handful of vegetable seeds that Gabriel had managed to procure. Leora studied the basket. "The crops will feed us, but they'll take months to grow." He gave a faint smile, the lines of worry on his face softening. "I have a bit saved away. We'll cover our needs until the harvest. And with the council's debts wiped away and the land restored to us, we can invest in better tools. A plough, proper, spade, maybe even a small cart." She clasped his shoulder. "We'll make this work." Together they walked to the barn, where Gabriel's few remaining tools were stored: a rusty plough, a worn spade, and an old scythe. Leora felt a pang of sorrow at the sight of their worn state. The tools were not fit for modern farming, but they would serve as symbols of their rebirth. Gabriel lifted the plough, testing its weight. "With this, we'll break the soil and begin again, but I'll need help." Leora's mind flicked to the villagers in Grimsfall, the families who had lost everything, the children who wandered aimlessly. "I can't do it alone," she admitted. "Quietly," Gabriel nodded. "Then we'll ask the people we freed." Leora frowned, recalling the ledger's names, dozens of farmers and craftsmen who had lost their homes. Some had fled, others remained, but their heads were bowed by shame. She knew that asking them for help carried risk. The memory of forced bondage ran deep, and not all would be willing to work alongside the daughter of the man who nearly condemned them. "I'll go to them," she said firmly. "I'll stand by this land and ask for their forgiveness and their strength." Gabriel watched her with pride, then climbed onto the old horse-drawn cart, rousing the steed with gentle coaxing. Leora climbed into the cart, and they headed through the broken gate toward Marlowe's field, a patch of land where several of the freed had built makeshift shacks. The road to Marlowe's field was pitted with ruts and stones. As they neared, Leora saw silhouettes. Men and women stooped over simple tasks, sweeping paths, mending tools, or tending to small cooking fires. Children played in the dust, laughter mingling with the morning breeze. Gabriel nudged the horse to a halt. "Stay. Here," he whispered, guiding her down. "Let me speak first." Leora watched him step forward, shoulders squared. He approached a lean man, patching a roof with old boards. "Marlowe," Gabriel said, voice low. "It's me, Gabriel Hartman." The man froze, his hand trembling on the board. He turned, red-faced, recognizing Gabriel's features. "You're the man who signed my debt's name to that ledger and sold me off when I couldn't pay." His voice cracked with anger and hurt. Gabriel bowed his head. "I'm sorry," he said, each syllable thick with remorse, "and I'm here to make things right." Marlowe's eyes flared with fury. "Make things right? You're the father of the girl who delivered the ledger. She could have stayed silent, saved you, and you wanted me in chains." Gabriel winced, looking as though a blow had struck him. "The council forced my hand, but that is no excuse. I beg your forgiveness." He reached beneath his cloak and produced a small pouch of coins. "Take this. It's a portion of what I owed you. Forgive me and help me rebuild this land, please." Marlowe stared at the pouch, then at Gabriel's earnest face. He let out a harsh laugh. "Build with me? Why should I trust the man who nearly murdered my family?" Gabriel drew a breath slowly. "Because I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay what I took. I beg your mercy, Marlowe, and ask for your strength." A tense silence followed. Leora watched from afar, aware of every breath, every shift of tension. She saw Marlowe's jaw clench, his eyes flicking between Gabriel's. Remorseful gaze in the small pouch. Finally Marlowe exhaled with a shuddering sigh. He extended a calloused hand and retrieved the pouch. "One day," he said, voice softening, "we'll talk more, but for now I'll plough the Westfield. See you at dawn." Gabriel nodded, eyes brimming with relief. Leora exhaled. If Marlowe could forgive, perhaps others would as well. They spent the morning traveling from shack to shack, Gabriel humbly offering coins, labor, and apologies. Some turned away, their eyes dark with grief and anger. Others whispered among themselves, questioning whether Gabriel deserved forgiveness. But each time, Leora stepped forward, signing her commitment. She would work alongside them, sharing the burden of labor until the land produced. Slowly, hands extended to help guide the plough, to mend a fence, to carry water. By nightfall, a small group of freed men and women had gathered in a circle around a crackling fire. They sat on overturned barrels and logs, gazing at Gabriel and Leora. "Tomorrow," Marlowe announced, "we'll begin at first light. Bring water. We'll start by clearing the fields." Leora felt tears sting her eyes. She bowed her head. "Thank you." As the group dispersed, Leora knelt by the fire and signed to Marlowe. "I'm sorry for what was done to you. I will not fail you." Marlowe put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not your father. We will work as one. Perhaps even friends." Leora nodded, determination blazing in her chest. Dawn arrived with a symphony of birdsong. Leora woke before sunrise, the air crisp with frost. She donned her cloak and stepped outside, inhaling the chill. She found Marlowe already at the main, Barnes stoking the coals of a small fire. His handiwork with the smouldering embers revealed a man who had known hardship but retained a flicker of hope. "Ready?" he asked, nodding to the fields where moist earth glimmered in the early light. "I am," she replied, picking up a shovel. "Let's begin." The two of them worked in tandem, Marlowe guiding the plough, Leora clearing clumps of sod and stones from the way. As dawn bled into morning, the furrows appeared, lines etched into hope itself. More freed men and women arrived, a craftsman named Clara, her hands steady and sure, a young farmer named Jorin, whose legs ached but whose spirit refused to break, and a mother named Beatha, carrying her daughter Rose, who had once seen Leora's plight and signed words of solidarity. The group moved steadily, laughter and conversation, rising above the clinks of tools and the rhythmic churn of earth. For the first time in years, the land felt alive, not just with crops, but with community. Leora paused in her work, letting the morning sun warm her face. She watched as Gabriel joined them, ploughing beside Marlowe. The sight warmed her heart, reminding her of how far they had come. She bent to pick up a handful of soil, letting the earth sift through her fingers. "Look at this," she called. "Rich, dark, alive." Marlowe looked over and nodded. "Soil remembers. We'll nurture it, and it will nurture us." Leora smiled. "Yes." They worked through midday, the sun climbing overhead. Leora felt sweat drip down her back, muscles burning with each step. Yet her spirit soared. She whispered the seed planters into the earth, dropping kernels of wheat and barley in uniform rows. The freed farmhands followed her lead, the seeds promising sustenance and a future. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they finished for the day. The fields were furrowed, and the seeds lay nestled in the rich soil. They stood in a loose circle, dirt-streaked and tired, but with smiles lighting their faces. Gabriel raised a flask of water, and they passed it around. Each took a long sip, relishing the cool liquid. Leora joined them, sipping and closing her eyes against the fading sunlight. Marlowe spoke, voice quiet yet resolute. "In 3 months, those seeds will stand tall. We'll have grain to sell, to trade, to feed our families. You did this, Leora Hartman." She shook her head. "We did this together. No one should endure alone." Betha stepped forward, holding her daughter Rose's hand. "You've shown us that mercy and hope can grow stronger than anger." Leora knelt and placed a hand gently on Rose's head. "You remind me why we do this." As dusk settled, they made their way back to the farmhouse, weary yet content. The fields behind them swayed ever so slightly, as though nodding in approval. In the farmhouse's small kitchen, Clara stirred a large pot of stew, the aroma of vegetables and herbs filling the air. Jorin set a wooden table, wiping it clean with a rag. Leora wandered to the window, gazing out at the fields. She felt the weight of responsibility in her chest. The seeds were small, but their potential was immense. She would not let hope wilt. Gabriel approached and placed a rough hand on her shoulder. "Come, daughter, eat. Tomorrow we plan for the councils." Formal acknowledgement. "Tomorrow the council meets again?" Leora asked, turning. "They will finalize the redistribution of lands and ensure no creditor dares to prey on the poor again," he said. "But for tonight, rest." Leora nodded, though her mind buzzed with thoughts. Of tomorrow, she followed her father into the kitchen, where the freed farmhands and freed families sat around a wooden table. They offered her a bowl of stew, and she accepted, savoring the warm broth. As she ate, she watched her father speak quietly with a council runner, a young man named Horace, who had carried the council's decree to Grimsfall. Gabriel looked relieved, but cautious. Leora sensed the council's begrudging respect. They would not easily relinquish power, but the ledger had toppled their illusions of invincibility. Dinner passed in gentle conversation, laughter from children chasing each other between the legs of seated adults, stories shared by those who had known bondage and dreams spoken aloud for a future no longer mired in debt and exploitation. Later, after the meal, Leora ventured into the barn to retrieve a small journal. She opened it to a blank page and began to write. "Today we sowed more than seeds, we sowed faith. The earth is our witness. How we emerge from darkness depends on the choices we make. I will make mine with courage." She closed the journal and slid it into her cloak pocket. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, the scent of beginnings. She paused, running her fingers along the handle of a scythe Gabriel had repaired. Each scar on its blade told a story of labor and survival. She smiled, recalling her mother's belief that a single stroke could change a life. She climbed onto the loft's hay bale and surveyed the room. In the dim lantern light, she imagined the years ahead, the hard seasons of planting and harvest, the rebuilding of homes, the laughter of children free from fear. She touched the journal's leather binding, feeling hope steady her soul. As the moon rose outside, its silver beams filtered through cracks in the barn's roof, casting patterns. On the floor, Leora closed her eyes, allowing sleep to wash over her, knowing that tomorrow the council would meet and the future of Grimsfall and Edgewood would be rewritten. Dawn arrived on the third day with a solemn hush. Leora and Gabriel stood on the front porch of their cottage, dressed in their simplest attire. Dark cloaks concealed Leora's worn dress, while Gabriel wore a clean shirt and trousers. The fields behind them shimmered with morning dew. The council runner Horace approached from the main road, escorting a small procession of council members, Rosine Mallory, Jareth Fallowfield, and several guards. They halted at the bottom of the yard, bows exchanged as formal greeting. Rosine stepped forward, her robe embroidered with the council's crest. "Mr. Hartman, Miss Hartman, we come bearing the council's decree." Gabriel nodded, his voice steady. "We await your news." Rosine unrolled a parchment sealed with crimson wax. She read aloud, "By decree of the Edgewood Council, upon verification of irrefutable evidence of fraudulent transactions committed against residents of Grimsfall and other districts, the lands wrongfully seized from Gabriel Hartman are hereby restored to his sole ownership. Further, all associated debts and liens are nullified, and any future attempts to levy claims against such lands shall be deemed unlawful and punishable by the council." Jareth stepped forward. "In addition, the council pledges to establish a coalition to monitor fair lending practices and provide counsel to debtors to prevent exploitation. A fund has been allocated from public treasury to assist farmers in reclaiming their homesteads." Leora felt tears blur her vision. She pressed a hand to her chest, gratitude and relief coursing through her. "Thank you," Gabriel said quietly. Rosine nodded solemnly. "We have but one condition, that the hash of the human trafficking ledger be made public. We will see to it that records are preserved for future transparency." Leora's shoulders sagged with relief. "It shall be done." Rosine produced a second parchment, the formal statement acknowledging the ledger's public release. She pressed it into Leora's hand. "This is your legacy, Miss Hartman. Your courage has ensured that justice prevails." Leora bowed her head. "I only did what I must to save my father and our home." Jareth grinned. "Your humility is as great as your courage. The council will stand condemned if we do not uphold our promises." After the council departed, Gabriel embraced Leora, lifting her off the ground. "You've given me life again, child." Leora laughed through tears. "Together, father." The freed farmhands emerged from the barn, tools in hand. Marlowe clapped his shoulder. "Well done, Leora. Don't forget us when the fields flourish." Leora smiled warmly. "Never." Clara offered her a basket of fresh eggs. Jorin handed a wooden box of herbs, and young Rose pressed a flower into her hand. "For your journal, Rose," said shyly. Leora's heart swelled. She rose to stand on the porch again, looking over the field. Past the rows where seeds lay nestled, she glimpsed the distant outline of Edgewood's silhouette and the reconstructed council chamber's spire. She raised her eyes to the sky, letting the new dawn fill her with possibility. Then, turning back, to the fields below, she crossed her arms over her chest. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Today we build." As the sun climbed higher, she and her father walked into the field, joined by the freed community. Together, they began the day's work, their movements synchronized in purpose, each stroke, each seed, each breath a testament to the power of truth, redemption, and unity. And so, Leora Hartman's story continued, the next chapters unwritten but glowing with promise. Proof that even in a town forgotten by time, when trouble rode in with the wind and legends faded slower than scars, one courageous voice could reshape a generation. Leora Hartman rose before dawn, her breath shallow as she eyed the fields that stretched out before her. The first rays of sunlight traced golden edges along the horizon, illuminating the dew that clung to the rows of newly sown wheat and barley. Each blade seemed to tremble with promise, a testament to the bond between earth and labor. But as much as the land inspired her, Leora felt a knot of fear twist in her chest. Today would mark a new trial, one that would test not only her physical endurance, but the very core of her spirit. The council's decree had spread through Grimsfall like wildfire. Word of the human trafficking ledger's publication had stirred both outrage and hope. Some townsfolk cheered their restored dignity. Others wondered what consequences might befall those whose reputations they had long revered. The pendulum of justice swung precariously, and Leora knew that the fragile peace they had built on tempered soil could shatter if shadows rose to reclaim power. Leora dressed swiftly in the small chamber above the barn, the single window framed the awakening sky. She pulled on a simple tunic and sturdy trousers, laced her boots, and tied her dark hair into tight braids. She glanced at her reflection in the scratched wooden surface of a dresser, herself in the soft dawn glow, eyes dark with determination. She placed a gentle kiss on the leather cover of her journal before tucking it into her satchel. Today, she thought, would require every scrap of courage she could muster. Below, Gabriel Hartman waited by the door, coat slung over his shoulders. His face was lined but resolute. He offered a brief, proud nod as she descended the creaking stairs. "Leora," he said, voice low, "I will join you later. Be cautious. The council's supporters remain wary. Some will seek to undermine our progress." She reached out to touch his arm. "I know, Father, but if we falter now, the hopes of many will crumble. I must see this through." He studied her for a moment, as though weighing her resolve. Then he squeezed her shoulder. "Go with my blessing. May your heart remain steadfast." With that, Leora stepped into the morning's chill. She paused, inhaling the scent of damp earth and fresh sap. Then she set off toward town, her boots crunching on frost-hardened soil. The path to Grimsfall's center led through the village green, where the fountain lay still. Its cracked basin was now filled with water again, as though restored in hope. Villagers milled about. A few older men huddled around a barrel, talking low. A mother led her children past, their eyes curious. Leora sensed the weight of their stares, many laced with gratitude, a few with skepticism. The ledger had revealed more than individual crimes. It exposed a societal rot, and not everyone was ready to confront such revelations. She pressed on, to the council outpost, a modest building at the outskirts of the green. Councilman Jareth Fallowfield had arranged to meet her before the morning session. As she approached, she observed 2 guards stationed by the door, expressions tight, eyes sharp. The weight of authority was tangible. One guard, tall and broad-shouldered, noticed her approach. His eyes, a deep brown, held no warmth, only duty. Leora swallowed and straightened her back, determined not to falter. "Miss Hartman?" he asked in a clipped tone, reaching for her shoulder. Jareth interceded, stepping out onto the porch. "Lieutenant Brenner, this is Miss Hartman. She has business with the council. Allow her passage." Lieutenant Derek Brenner's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside. "Very well, councilman." Leora gave a curt nod of thanks and entered the outpost. The interior was cool, lit by the pale light of lanterns hung from wooden beams. A single clerk sat at a desk, meticulous in his tasks. The walls bore tapestries depicting Edgewood's founding. Leora's footsteps sounded loud in the hush. Jareth led her into a private chamber at the outpost's rear, an enclosed office lined with ledgers and parchments. A high-backed chair sat behind a long desk, and a portrait of Lord Elandrin dominated the far wall. Despite the portrait's stern presence, the air was surprisingly quiet, as though the room itself held its breath. Jareth sighed, resting both hands on the desk. "Miss Hartman, the council convenes this morning at 8. President Elandrin requested your presence. He wishes to hear your account on the ledger and your proposal for the Reformation Fund." Leora stepped forward, placing her satchel gently on the desk. She removed her journals and laid them beside theirs. "I appreciate the invitation, but I must speak plainly. The council must not treat this as a mere formality. These records demand accountability and swift action." Jareth inclined his head. "We are of one mind, but others on the council will resist. Elandrin remains cautious, perhaps weary of the council's image. I suspect he will test your resolve." Leora nodded, her stomach tightening. "Then I will stand firm." At that moment, the creaking of heavy doors down the hallway signaled the council's arrival. Jareth opened the chamber door to announce her. Leora stepped out into the main hall, where the council members were mid-discussion. Rosine Mallory and Jareth stood off to one side, whispering. Lord Elandrin, tall and imposing in his robes of deep violet, turned his gaze upon her. His silver hair gleamed under the torchlight. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers. Though they had never formally been introduced, Leora felt as though he had seen her entire soul, exposed in the ledger's pages. "Miss Hartman," he said, voice smooth but firm, "we are pleased you could join us. Please share what you would have the council hear." She stepped into the center of the semicircle formed by the council benches. Her pulse pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Esteemed council members, I stand before you as a daughter, a clerk, and a citizen. You have seen the ledger's revelations. How men, using their power, stripped families of their homes and dignity, forced them into labor or worse. Among them was my father, Gabriel Hartman. Today I propose not only that the council enforce justice against those found guilty, but that we establish a reformation fund, sustained by a tithe from all councilmen's incomes, dedicated to assisting families who have suffered. A seed of mercy, so that no child learns of bondage as I once did." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Councilwoman Mallory nodded supportively. Councilman Fallowfield averted his gaze, jaw taut. Lord Elandrin cocked his head. "A tithe from the council incomes, you say? A bold proposal. Many will balk at the suggestion of diverting funds they have earned. Where do you suggest we draw the line?" Leora inhaled deeply. "By our conscience, and by the proof set before us, a minimum tithe of 5% from each council member's monthly earnings to be deposited into a public ledger. These funds will be used to pay rents, buy livestock, and provide seed, ensuring families can rebuild. The council's moral authority depends on more than judgment. It requires tangible restoration." Silence settled. Councilwoman Mallory was the first to speak. "Miss Hartman's proposal is just, but how do we guarantee accountability? We have witnessed how records can be doctored and hidden. We need safeguards." She turned to Elandrin. "A transparent public register accessible to any citizen." "Agreed," Jareth said. "I will volunteer to oversee the register's integrity." Elandrin's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the chamber. "These measures will require amendments to council law. I see merit, but we must also consider the legal ramifications, international loan agreements, trade alliances, existing budgets. I will not rashly legislate, Leora pressed on. Then let us appoint a commission to draft the reforms. Present them next week. Every day delayed is another day families suffer in limbo. Life in the council chamber accelerated. Elandrin had scribes, fetched scrolls and ledgers, and clerks hurried to consult legal codes. Leora stepped back as Rosine took her place at Elandrin's side, reading from a thick tome. The commission will consist of Councilwoman Mallory, Councilman Fallowfield, Miss Hartman, and 2 representatives from Grimsfall, Father Umbridge and Marlowe. They will report in 7 days. Is this agreeable? Elandrin's voice cut through the rising tension, a chorus of nods. Leora felt a surge of relief, but also anxiety. The real work lay ahead, drafting legislation that could withstand entrenched interests. After the session adjourned, Leora found herself in a quiet corridor, her heart still thrumming. Jareth approached, his expression solemn. "Well done. But you've made powerful adversaries. Be wary," she nodded. "I will, thank you for your support." He offered a faint smile. "We face a long road, but today a spark ignited. Now we must fan it into flame." Leora exhaled and made her way to the outer door. The sun shone brighter now, dispelling the morning chill. She retrieved her satchel and emerged into the bustling streets of Edgewood. As she navigated the market square, she noticed subtle shifts. A once celebrated merchant whose family name appeared in the ledger stood at his stall, disregarded by shoppers. He smiled, a practiced grin, but his eyes darted with uncertainty. Nearby, former laborers moved freely for the first time, pausing to exchange nods of gratitude with Leora. She veered off the main road, heading toward a quieter alley near the southern gate. Casimir Forbes had requested another meeting. Although she felt uneasy in trusting matters to him, his motives remained veiled. She recognized his crucial role in unearthing the truth. Upon reaching the alley, she found a simple wooden door set between 2 larger stone buildings. The wood was weathered, knotted with age. A small lantern burned above its frame, shedding a soft pool of light. Leora braced herself and knocked. Casimir produced a set of keys, each intricately shaped to fit the locks. He worked quickly, sliding and turning. The metallic echoes of unlocking hovered in the silence. Finally, the gate groaned open, revealing a vaulted room lined with shelves. The dank air clung to Leora's lungs. In the center lay a wooden table, and upon it rested a ledger bound in black leather, its cover etched with the Slavia seal. Leora approached it cautiously, uncertain whether to open it. Casimir placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "This ledger documents the Council's collusion with the Slavia family, names, dates, shipments. It also references a hidden network of warehouses where enslaved individuals were held before transport." She swallowed, trembling, and knelt beside the table. With reverence, she traced the embossed seal with her fingertips. The leather was cracked, brittle with age. "We must record its contents," Casimir said. "But who will believe us if we bring this to light? Some will label us as forgers. We must find undeniable proof, corroborating documents, testimonies from survivors." Leora nodded. "Father Umbridge. He knows of the people sold from Grimsfall and can help gather accounts. Marlowe suggested the memorial chapel he built in Grimsfall, where survivors have offered their testimonies in secret. We can cross-reference names from this ledger with their accounts." Casimir studied her solemn expression. "Then we must act swiftly, but tonight we start here. I have devised a cipher to translate the ledger's archaic script. While you transcribe, I will search for any accompanying maps or codes." Leora took a deep breath and opened the ledger. The pages were densely filled with faded ink, the script flowing in harsh Latin and an archaic dialect that blended Slavian and common tongue. Her eyes skimmed the headings: datum emptor, import, exports, nomina pecuniae, until she reached entries listing names from Grimsfall, Marlow, Ashwood, and, her eyes widened, Hartman, Gabriel, margin note, collateral, forfeited. A surge of righteous fury flared within her chest, but she quelled it. She dipped her quill into ink and began to transcribe, each careful stroke spelling out names that had haunted her father's nightmares. Hours passed in silence. The only sounds were the scratching of quills and occasional distant drips. Leora catalogued names and dates, her hand cramping from the motion. Blocks of text detailed shipments, hundreds of men and women sold to Westport and beyond, each ledger entry accompanied by a price and destination. The ledger revealed deeper corruption. Council members had been receiving kickbacks, secret payments funneled into offshore accounts to sustain their influence. Casimir emerged from a nearby nook, holding a bundle of faded maps. These are plans for the old slave warehouses along the river. Many have collapsed, but some remain intact. If we expose them... Leora's pen paused. We can't leave those sites as tombs. We must reclaim them for the living, create a monument, a refuge. But first, this corruption must be brought into the light. Casimir nodded. There is one more piece. Testimonies recorded under code by conspirators who later fell out with the Slavia. I found them sealed in a hidden scroll. They're brittle but legible. If we combine these accounts with the ledger, no one can deny the truth. Leora stood, eyes burning with purpose. We need to move these documents somewhere safer and plan our next steps. I'll fetch them from the scroll's hiding place, another chamber beyond the southern passage. As she rose, the echoes of her boots rattled through the vault. Casimir handed her a lantern and a small satchel. Be cautious. Guards patrol above at sunrise. We have little time. Leora nodded and traversed the narrow corridor. The air grew, colder and more oppressive. She imagined those who had endured captivity within these stone walls. At the corridor's end, she found a small chamber containing a wooden chest bound in iron. She brushed away cobwebs and lifted the lid, revealing a sealed scroll, sealed with red wax bearing the Slavia emblem. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unrolled the brittle parchment. The testimonies written in trembling script detailed the horror of forced labor, the brazen greed of council members, and the clandestine meetings in hidden groves. Leora carefully lifted the scroll and placed it into her satchel, closing the chest behind her. As she turned, a faint sound echoed beyond the corridor, a muted click, like a latch being lifted. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, lantern held to her chest, heart pounding. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Leora pressed herself against the wall, pressing her back into the cold stone. Her pulse thundered so loudly she feared it would betray her. A dark figure emerged from the shadows at the corridor's mouth. The dim glow of her lantern revealed a uniform's gloss, the insignia of Edgewood's Guard. The officer's face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his tall stature and confident gait marked him as someone accustomed to authority. Leora recognized him, Captain Renard Elliot, second in command of the Guard. His reputation for loyalty to the Council was well known. His presence here meant that the ledger's secrets had not gone unnoticed by those in power. She tightened her grip on the scroll and the lantern. Captain Elliot's booted soles scrapped on the stone floor as he advanced, lantern in hand. His crisp uniform seemed incongruous in this chamber of decay. "Well, well," he said, voice low but mocking. "What have we here? Miss Hartman, I presume." Leora's throat tightened. "Captain Elliot, I'm simply cataloguing these archives for safekeeping," he smirked. "Safekeeping? I don't think the Council will see it that way. Come, let me escort you back to Elandrin's chambers. He has much to discuss with you regarding the Commission's work." Leora forced a composed nod, despite her racing pulse. She squeezed the satchel's strap, ensuring the scroll remained secure. "May I accompany you?" she asked quietly, stepping into view. Captain Elliot's eyes narrowed, and he holstered his lantern. "If you insist, but know this, any attempt to conceal documents will be construed as treason." Leora's heart pounded. She turned and began retracing her steps, every sense alert. Captain Elliot followed closely, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. They emerged back into the vault's main room. The heavy iron gate loomed behind them, locks gleaming dully. Casimir stood beside Lord Elandrin, who had evidently discovered their presence. Elandrin's pale eyes were cold as he watched Leora's approach. "Miss Hartman," he said, voice laced with controlled ire, "you have ventured into prohibited areas. Care to explain?" Leora's knees trembled, but she lifted her chin. "I am cataloguing these records to ensure transparency. I seek no treason, only truth." Captain Elliot stepped forward, lantern in hand. "The captain is correct, miss. These chambers are restricted. Your actions could be viewed as sabotage." Elandrin folded his hands behind his back. "Miss Hartman, your zeal is admirable, but you risk destabilizing the council and the city. If you wish to purge corruption, follow the proper process. Present your findings through the commission." Leora's mind raced. She clutched the satchel, feeling the weight of every secret. Secrets that could topple the council's foundation. She took a slow breath, steadying her voice. "President Elandrin, I understand the need for due process. But time is short. Those implicated will act to silence this proof. I only seek a chance to present it to you, to the public, before darkness engulfs us all." Elandrin's gaze lingered on the satchel. "Open it." A hush settled. Leora hesitated, then unbuckled the satchel's clasp and pulled out the scroll, placing it on the table. She met Elandrin's gaze as she carefully unrolled the brittle parchment. The testimony's words, penned in shaky ink, lay bare. Names of council members, accounts of atrocities. The chamber's torchlight illuminated the faded script. Elandrin's face darkened. He exchanged a glance with Captain Elliot, silent calculation passing between them. "These testimonies," Elandrin said, voice gravity-bound. "How did you obtain them?" Leora's voice was firm. "This chamber, the Slavia family's vaults, these records belong to conspirators who turned against them. They entrusted these words to history." Another tense moment passed. Elandrin closed, his eyes briefly as though summoning resolve. Then he opened them, fixing Leora with a measured gaze. "Very well. If these testimonies are genuine, and if the ledger corroborates them, the council will be forced to act. However, we must proceed with caution to prevent a panic. Captain Elliot, escort Miss Hartman and ensure her safety. Councilman Fallowfield, prepare to convene an emergency session. We will review these documents under lock and key." Leora nodded, though her heart pounded like a drum. Captain Elliot inclined his head in curt acknowledgement and guided her back through the twisting corridor. "Miss Hartman, your audacity is remarkable," he said quietly as they walked. "But remember, not everyone seeks the truth. Some will cling to power at any cost." Leora walked on, the scroll tucked safely in her satchel. She realized that the path she had chosen would exact a price: danger, duplicity, and the burden of bearing truth that could rend the fragile social fabric. Yet she also understood that if she faltered now, the legacies of the enslaved and the vanquished would hold her accountable. They emerged into the pale morning light. Leora shielded her eyes from the spin of color, cobblestones, faces, roofs of slate and tile. She sensed glances from passers-by, as though the city itself watched her with a mixture of curiosity and fear. As Captain Elliot led her to a carriage waiting by the gate, Leora felt the weight of destiny rest upon her shoulders. She climbed aboard, heart thudding. The carriage lurched forward, depositing them near the council chambers where Fallowfield awaited. Inside the chambers, Leora felt a hush as she entered. The room was arranged for an emergency gathering, several benches filled with council members, some seated, others standing. At the dais, Elendren sat flanked by Rosine and Fallowfield. The air crackled with tension. Elendren motioned for silence. "Miss Hartman, Captain Elliot, you may present the documents." His gaze was sharp, unwavering. Leora stepped forward, drawing out the scroll and placing it gently on the table. She then retrieved her transcription of the ledger's contents. One by one she revealed pages, reading aloud names and accounts. Each syllable landed in the hushed chamber like a hammer strike. Council members shifted in their seats, eyes flashing with guilt, anger, or fear. "The evidence is irrefutable," Leora said, voice echoing. "Those named here conspired with the Slavia family to traffic human beings, to profit from lives stolen. Now you have a choice: uphold justice or abdicate the council's honor." Another silence fell, thick as storm clouds. Elendren stood, clearing his throat. "The council will deliberate. In the meantime, these records will be sealed under my watch. Anyone found interfering with them will face the harshest penalties." A council member, a man named Thayer Almont, rose from his seat, eyes blazing. "You're overstepping, girl. You have no right to judge us." Leora met his gaze unflinchingly. "I have every right. I stand for those who cannot speak. Your titles do not absolve you of your crimes." Gasps and murmurs erupted. Rosine stepped forward and raised a hand for order. "Enough. We must proceed with care. Any hasty action could provoke violence. We will reconvene publicly tomorrow to announce our findings and plan accordingly. Dismissed." Leora turned to leave, her chest tight. Captain Elliot approached, offering a curt nod that lacked warmth. "Miss Hartman, take care. The council's next moves will matter." Leora nodded. "Thank you." She left the chamber, the weight of every eye upon her. As she stepped out into the corridor, a cold draught sent a shiver through her. She paused, drawing a shaky breath. A footstep approached. Father Umbridge's familiar shuffle. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You have done well, child. But this road grows darker." His voice trembled with concern. "I'll be waiting at the chapel." "You need rest." Leora managed a weary smile. "I will rest eventually, but first I must face tomorrow." Umbridge nodded, his gaze filled with pride and worry. "May the light guide you." Leora stepped into the morning sun, the council's walls looming behind. Her path was uncertain, fraught with peril, but she had chosen it freely. Her gaze turned toward Grimsfall, her home, her father, and the community who had placed their faith in her. She drew strength from their memory. Ahead lay the most pivotal trial of all. Would those in power embrace truth or quash it to preserve their dominion? The city felt still, as if holding its breath. Leora squared her shoulders and walked on. Night had fallen when Leora Hartman finally arrived at the chapel in Grimsfall. A single lantern burned above the door, casting golden light that danced across the weathered stones. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and smouldering embers from the hearths that had not yet died out. She tensed as she approached the entrance, every nerve on edge from the day's revelations. Father Umbridge was waiting by the wooden door, his robed form silhouetted against the glow. His eyes were tired but resolute. He pushed open the door and gestured for Leora to enter. Inside, the chapel offered a stark contrast to the outside world. High wooden beams arched overhead, and the scent of incense still lingered, woven with the faint smoke of candle wax. Stained glass windows depicted saints and martyrs, their colors muted in the flickering light. Pews lined the aisle, and at the front the altar stood decorated with simple flowers and a polished wooden cross. Leora closed the door behind her and took a moment to collect herself. The tension that had gripped her all day threatened to fray her composure. She moved toward a bench near the back, seating herself quietly. Father Umbridge approached, carrying a cup of steaming tea. "Drink," he said, pressing the cup into her hands. "You have walked through fire today." Leora accepted the tea, warmth blooming in her chest as she lifted it to her lips. "Thank you," she murmured. She wrapped her fingers around the cup, savoring its comfort. Father Umbridge seated himself across from her. His gaze shifted to the stained glass window, reflecting a kaleidoscope of colors onto his silver hair. "Tomorrow," he began softly, "the Council will present its findings to the public. This could mark a turning point for Grimsfall and Edgewood. We must ensure the people are prepared." Leora nodded, finishing the tea. "I worry, if the Council delays or manipulates the evidence, we could lose everything we fought for. We have allies, Miss Hartman. Marlowe and the Freed families stand ready. But beyond them you must reach the common folk, farmers, laborers, shopkeepers. We need them to believe in the truth and stand against any countermeasures." Leora rose from the bench. "Then I will go into the town square first thing. I must speak to them myself." Father Umbridge rose, nodding in approval. "I will send word to Marlowe and the others. You will not be alone." Leora left the chapel, stepping into the cool night. The path to the town square was illuminated by torches that cast long shadows across cobblestones. She paused at a stone archway, pausing to breathe in the night air and steel her resolve. The square was empty now, the fountain silent, but tomorrow it would throng with faces, some hopeful, some suspicious. She took one final breath and walked toward the inn where she would rest before dawn. In the dimly lit common room of the inn, Marlowe stood behind a wooden table strewn with crumbs and empty mugs. He looked up when Leora entered, relief flooding his face. "Miss Hartman," he said, voice hushed, "they're waiting for you." A crowd of townspeople from Grimsfall gathered, veterans of debts, widows, and orphans. "They want to hear your words." "Before the Council speaks," Leora nodded. "I understand. Where?" Marlowe pointed to the back door. "At the edge of the square. They're here, waiting in the shadows." Leora stepped out into the crisp night air. The moon shone overhead, casting a silver glow on the rough stones of the square. She walked toward the fountain, where a group of villagers huddled near the steps, faces etched with uncertainty. She took her place on the fountain's ledge, her gaze sweeping across them. She saw Elsie Tanner, a widow whose husband had died, of illness when he lost his farm to debt. She saw old Thomas Redwick, who had once sold his daughter's inheritance to pay off interest. She saw children flanking their mothers, hope mingled with apprehension in their wide eyes. Leora's voice carried through the night, resonant and steady. "My friends, tomorrow the Council will unveil the truth behind the Ledger's revelations. They will present the evidence of those who enslaved our neighbors, our kin, for profit. But the Council could spin these words to protect their own. I ask you, do not wait for their directives. Let us stand together. Do not let fear silence you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elsie's voice trembled as she spoke. "Miss Hartman, how can we trust? They have taxed us, dismissed our pleas for mercy." Leora nodded slowly. "I know they have wronged you. I have witnessed their greed with my own eyes. But now the ledger and the testimonies will be laid bare. The truth is as clear as day. The Council can no longer hide behind forged documents." Thomas Redwick, leaning on a cane, let out a shaky breath. "Even so, some will cling to their seats. They will not relinquish power easily." A child's voice piped up, "Miss Hartman, will the fields truly yield? Can we rebuild?" Leora knelt, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "Yes, With unity and perseverance our fields will flourish, but we must hold our council accountable. First, the seeds of corruption have taken root long enough. Let us uproot them together. A chorus of nods followed. Elsie stepped closer, offering Leora a worn shawl. We stand with you. No more shadows. Leora wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and rose. Then join me at dawn in the square. Let us not be silenced. Let our voices rise together in truth. The villagers dispersed, their steps echoing. Leora watched them go, her heart both heavy and buoyant. Night surrendered to dawn, and she retreated to the inn to prepare for the day ahead. Daybreak came swiftly, draping the square in soft light. Leora Hartman climbed atop a makeshift platform constructed hastily from crates and wooden boards. The crowd had gathered, men and women in simple attire, children holding their parents' hands, elders leaning on canes or walking sticks. A silence fell as she cleared her throat. "Good morning, Grimsfall," she announced. "Today is ours." Her voice echoed off the stone facades. "The Council of Edgewood convenes this morning to reveal the findings of the human trafficking ledger. But their version may not reflect the full extent of the corruption you've endured. That is why we are here, to ensure the truth is heard." A murmur swept across the crowd. Elsie, standing front and center, spoke. "How do we know our voices will matter?" Leora took a deep breath. "Because we will not be silent. When the council hears that Grimsfall watches, that the people will not tolerate half-truths, they will be forced to act. We have witnesses. We have families whose children were taken. We have records that cannot be erased. We demand a fair hearing. We demand accountability." Her words ignited a spark in the crowd. Voices rose in agreement. Shouts of justice and truth began to echo through the square. A low drumbeat of determination pulsed through the gathered townspeople. Unexpectedly, a figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Gabriel Hartman, wearing a simple tunic and carrying a basket of freshly baked bread. He moved through the villagers, offering loaves freely. Each recipient accepted the bread with shy gratitude, their eyes filled with respect for the man who had once been broken by debt. Leora saw him and felt a swell of pride. He climbed onto the platform beside her, his presence a steadying force. The crowd parted to make room as he stood there, his posture steady. "Friends," Gabriel's voice was low but carried through the square. "I have been humbled by your forgiveness and support. The council has rights to these fields, but they lost the moral high ground when they forsook their duty to protect families. Today we stand together not only for ourselves, but for our children's futures." The crowd erupted in applause, then settled again as Leora resumed speaking. "Let us walk to Edgewood together, with banners, with voices, in solidarity. We will march to the council chambers and stand as witnesses to the truth. They will see that corruption cannot hide behind their walls." A cheer rose up, and the villagers began to gather makeshift banners, white cloth with simple messages. Truth for Grimsfall, no more chains, justice for the enslaved. Leora's heart thudded as she watched the transformation of fear into resolve. She turned to Gabriel. "I will go ahead. Keep the path open behind me." He nodded. "Go. I will follow." Leora stepped off the platform and began moving down the main thoroughfare, the crowd parting to let her pass. As she walked, she glanced back to see Marlowe, Clara, Jorin, and others forming the vanguard, their fists raised in determination. The procession wound through narrow lanes toward the northern gate that led to Edgewood. People sprang to the edges of the route, offering nods of solidarity or joining the march, their numbers swelling. As they approached the gate, Captain Elliot and a regiment of guards formed a barrier across the road. Lieutenant Brenner, standing at Elliot's side, raised a hand. "Halt the procession! Leora Hartman, you are trespassing on Edgewood's jurisdiction without permit. Disperse at once." Leora halted, chest heaving. She stepped forward, raising her voice to carry over the crowd. "We come in peace, demanding that the council hear our plea. We will not be turned back." Lieutenant Brenner's face remained stony. "Then you will face consequences." Marlowe closed ranks behind Leora. "We'll face you, Captain Elliot," he called. At that moment, Jareth and Rosine emerged from the northwest watchtower, robes flowing. Councilwoman Mallory's fiery presence cut through the tension. "Stand down, Brenner," she commanded. He hesitated, glancing to Elandrin, who now strode out onto a balcony above the gate. The crowd's hush deepened with anticipation. Leora gazed up at Elandrin, who looked down with a grave expression. "Miss Hartman, people of Grimsfall," he began, voice amplified. "By a collaborative use of bellows and horn, I hear your pleas. The council will convene an emergency session here, now. We will publicly present the ledger and the testimonies, and every voice present will be heard. But I must ask you to allow order to prevail." Leora felt a wave of relief. She raised her hand. "We accept your terms, President Elandrin, and we expect nothing less than the full truth." The gate guards fell back, forming a respectful line as the council members descended via a set of temporary wooden stairs. Leora's gaze roamed the assembled faces, villagers, freed laborers, council members. She drew a steadying breath, realizing how precarious the moment was, truth and deception poised on a knife's edge. Elandrin motioned for silence. "Let us begin." He lifted a sealed box made of oak, emblazoned with the Slavia seal. "Inside this box are the new ledger and testimonies. Let them be opened and read to all." The box was placed on a low table in the square's center. Leora edged forward, her pulse echoing in her ears. Councilman Fallowfield drew a ceremonial dagger and broke the seal. He opened the lid, revealing the ledger and a bundle of brittle scrolls. Rosine Mallory took the scrolls first, untying the wax seal, and, unfurling the brittle parchment, she began to read aloud. Names, dates, accounts of violent betrayal, her voice unwavering despite the gravity of the words. The townspeople leaned forward, listening intently as their very lives and loved ones were spoken into existence once more. As the scrolls were read, council members' faces shifted, Elandrin's jaw clenched, Mallory's eyes brimming with sorrow, and Fallowfield's posture sagging. A low rumble of outrage grew within the crowd. "Shame!" shouted a woman near the fountain. "Shame on them!" Leora felt tears stinging her eyes as Lenthy Rickson, an elder from the outskirts, stepped forward. With a trembling voice, he recited his testimony, barely audible above the crowd's roar. He spoke of his wife, taken at the market by Slavia, men at the behest of council members sold overseas. He detailed how he had searched endlessly, his pleas ignored. When he finished, the square erupted in a cacophony of shouts. "Justice! Responsibility! Retribution!" Leora raised her hand, stepping onto a crate to address the crowd. "We have listened. Now we must call upon the council to answer the charges before us. Who among you will speak?" Hands shot up across the square. A young woman named Clara stepped forward. Her voice rang out. "Did you know, Lord Elandrin, that your family profited from these schemes too? How can you stand among us now?" Elandrin's face hardened. "These matters require due process. Accusations must be weighed carefully by the council and judiciary." "Due process?" Elsa Tanner shouted. "You sold children! Our daughters! Fair process would have spared them." A hush fell. Elandrin cleared his throat, glancing at the ledger's pages before him. "As president of the Council of Edgewood, I pledge to establish a tribunal, an impartial jury drawn from both Edgewood and Grimsfall. They will hear each case, examine evidence, and pass judgment according to the laws of the land. Those found guilty will face penalty in accordance with the crime, loss of property, titles, and in some instances, imprisonment. The crowd's reaction was mixed, cheers and cries of skepticism. Leora stepped forward. "And the Reformation Fund, Minister?" "Fallowfield, you pledged to tithe your income. Will you fulfill that?" Fallowfield's shoulders slumped. "Yes, a 5% tithe from my official salary will be allocated immediately to the fund to aid those affected. I will serve as its guardian." A roar of approval followed. Josiah Redwick, a blacksmith whose family had been sold, stepped forward. "And the council members implicated here, what of them?" Elandrin responded, "They will be suspended from council duties until the tribunal concludes its work." Leora felt her heart hammer in her chest. The moment hung in suspension, teetering between hope and fear. Suddenly, a cry rang out. "That is not enough. They must be stripped of their titles now." Murmurs spread like wildfire. The tension in the square coalesced into a single, palpable force. Elandrin raised a hand for order. "Patience. We must follow due process. But know this, I will not stand idle if any councilman attempts to flee or conceal evidence. I pledge to you all, justice will prevail." He let his words linger for a heartbeat before stepping back. The council members retreated behind a cordon, formed by Captain Elliot and his men. The crowd surged forward, voices raised in anger and vindication. Leora realized that the true battle was only just beginning. How to ensure that justice was not subsumed by politics, how to guard against vigilantism born of righteous fury, and how to guide Grimsfall toward a future untainted by fear. She stood, amid the storm, her heart blazing with resolve. She turned to Marlowe, who nodded in grim solidarity. "The council has spoken," Leora called out, straining her voice, "but their words must be matched by deeds. Tomorrow, the tribunal convenes within these walls. We will be there to testify, to bear witness, and to demand that truth not be twisted. We hold the power now. Do not let it slip through our fingers." The crowd's roar rose again, a tide of fervor, a testament to their unity and anger. In that moment, Leora understood that the path forward would be fraught with danger, betrayal, and the potential for heartbreak. Yet she also glimpsed the promise of redemption, a hope that the courageous could forge a new legacy from ashes. And as the dawn light illuminated the faces of the townspeople, etched with resolve, fear, and hope, Leora Hartman felt the weight of her calling. Here in the heart of Grimsfall, she would stand as the guardian of their truth, come what may. Leora Hartman sat in silence outside the council chambers in Grimsfall, the early morning light pale against her fatigue-stained face. Moments ago, the tribunal had adjourned after hearing hours of testimonies. Voices dripped with pain, fury, and unwavering hope. The air still thrummed with tension as townspeople and freed laborers milled around in clusters, trading glances and murmured judgments. Leora's shoulders ached from standing for so long, but she refused to sit. Her gaze remained fixed on the chamber's heavy oak doors, behind which the fate of countless lives, her father's, her own, and the entire community's, hung precariously. She had given her testimony, her voice trembling yet resolute, recalling the ledger's entries and the testimonies of survivors. She had described how council members had profited off the suffering of others, how her father's land had been seized not through legitimate means, but through collusion with the Slavia family's slave trade ring. And she had argued that justice demanded more than paltry tithes and symbolic remorse. It demanded real accountability, restitution, and continued vigilance. Now she awaited the tribunal's final decision. Despite the anxiety knotting her stomach, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The relentless undercurrent of her determination still burned bright within her chest. This was her home, her father's legacy, and the future of everyone in Grimsfall. The outcome of these proceedings would either forge a path toward real healing or consign them to endure those same injustices once more. At her side, Gabriel Hartman approached, his gait still weary yet steady. He laid a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into the touch gratefully. "You need rest," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Let them finish. You've done more than any of us could have imagined." Leora nodded, breathing deeply as if to pour her resolve back into her lungs. She rose to her feet, pushing away the exhaustion. "I will not leave your side, Father, not until we know their fate." Gabriel offered a small, proud smile. "Then stay, my child. We will face what comes together." They joined a cluster of villagers, forming a human barrier around the council's entrance. Marlowe stood nearby, arms crossed, stoic as a sentinel. Clara held her daughter Rose in her arms, her expression one of wearied hope. Jorin conversed quietly with Father Umbridge, his brows knit with concern. Even the children who had once chased each other through the fields now hovered close, eyes filled with a solemn anticipation. It was as though the entire community had gathered its breath, poised on the brink of dawn's revelation. A hush fell as the chamber doors swung open. Council President Elandrin emerged first, his posture stern, his face shadowed by the morning's weight. Behind him walked Councilwoman Rosine Mallory, her expression haunted but resolved. Councilman Jareth Fallowfield followed, exhaustion flickering across his features. The chamber's clerks and scribes brought up the rear, their quills paused, pens dripping ink that would soon be recorded in public registers. Leora felt her pulse quicken. She gripped a handkerchief in her fist, letting her fingers tighten around its folds. In that moment, she tried to shut out all noise, the scuff of feet, the low hum of voices, the flutter of banners overhead. She had promised herself she would not falter. Elandrin cleared his throat, raising a hand for quiet. The crowd stilled instantly, as though held in place by an unseen hand. "People of Grimsfall," Elandrin began, his voice carrying across the square. "The tribunal has concluded its deliberations." A murmur rippled through the assembled throng, anticipation, dread, hope entwined in a single thread. "We find several council members guilty of collusion with the former Slavia network and of profiting from the enslavement of citizens from Grimsfall and other regions. Detailed judgments will follow, but for now, the immediate consequences are as follows." Leora's breath caught. Elandrin paused, inhaling slowly as though imparting reverence to the moment. "Mortimer Ashwood, council member. You are stripped of all titles, offices and privileges. Your properties, including the lands acquired from the Hartman estate, are to be returned. You are to be sentenced to a term of hard labor, as decreed by local code here in Grimsfall, until recompense is made to those you have wronged." A collective gasp rose from the villagers, and a ripple of approval surged through the crowd. Mortimer Ashwood fell to his knees, cheeks ashen. His once imposing frame now appeared as brittle as ancient clay. "Jareth Fallowfield, council member. You are hereby suspended from council duties for a period of 3 years, effective immediately. Your share of the Reformation Fund remains in place, and you will personally oversee the distribution of aid to the families impacted by these crimes. Failure to fulfill this duty will result in further sanctions." The murmurs continued, some of approval, others of skepticism. Leora noted that Jareth's shoulders sagged, as though bearing the weight of unspoken guilt. Rosine Mallory, councilwoman. Though your name appears in cross-references tied to financial transfers, the evidence shows no indication that you personally benefited from the slave trade. However, you are to cede your position in the council voluntarily as a gesture of solidarity. You may stand for election again after a 5-year intermission. Rosine pressed her lips, blinking back tears, but she steadied herself with a nod. Lord Elandrin, President of the Council, though no direct evidence ties you to illicit trade, as head of the Council, your leadership failed to prevent these injustices. You are to serve as the Council's moral guardian. You will oversee the Reformation Committee and ensure that this Council acts to undo the damage. Should any future wrongdoing occur under your watch, you will be held accountable. There will be no salary for the next year. Let this be a testament to the Council's commitment to genuine restitution. A hush fell over the square as Elandrin bowed his head. The significance of his duty settled over the crowd like a tangible presence. Leora felt a bitter mix of vindication and caution. The Council had spoken, but words alone would not dismantle centuries of injustice. Elandrin continued, voice firm but carrying a tremor of sorrow. Finally, I proclaim a full public registry to be maintained in the Grimsfall Chapel. Here, every documented case of exploitation, usury, and trafficking will be recorded and accessible to all citizens. We pledge to allocate funds for the building of a memorial garden, a sanctuary for those who suffered, and a monument to this day's triumph. A scattering of cheers and cries of joy broke through. Leora sensed tears pricking her eyes, and she let them fall. She stepped toward the platform, her cloak brushing against the cobblestones. "But this is not the end," she called, voice steady. "This is the beginning. We have reclaimed our lands, but we must also break the cycle of fear. If any see that the Council's promises fall to dust, we will rise again. We must rebuild, and we must hold our leaders to account every day. Today we stand united as free people. Tomorrow we plant seeds in the fields, in our hearts, and in our governance. Let this day mark the dawn of true justice." Her words soared across the square, and the crowd roared in affirmation. From the edges, freed laborers stepped forward, holding hands with their former captors, symbolizing solidarity. Leora's heart soared as she saw Gabriel's proud face, Marlowe's steady gaze, Clara's determined stance, and the boundless hope in young Rose's eyes. As the crowd's fervor swelled, Leora realized how far they had all come from that day in the dusty courthouse when she first sacrificed her voice to save her father. The scale of injustice had been vast, and the path to redemption had been steep, but together they had ascended. In that moment, Leora understood that her role was not over. She would serve as the living memory of this day, inscribing its lessons in ink and heart. She would guide her community through years of rebuilding, ensuring that those who suffered were never forgotten. And as the morning sun filtered through the gathering mist, casting rays of gold across the cobblestones, Leora turned and walked back toward the fields, her steps deliberate, her purpose unwavering. She felt the promise of every seed trembling beneath the fertile soil, ready to spring forth in life. In her lungs, she carried the breath of her ancestors' silent pleas. In her hands, she bore the ledger's ink-stained pages, each letter a vow of remembrance. Leora lifted her face to the sky, letting the warmth of the sun settle into her bones. She whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for her father's unwavering faith, for her mother's enduring spirit, and for the community that had stood with her. Then, turning back to the fields, she said aloud with resolute clarity, "Today, we build forever. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications."